Okay, everyone, welcome back to the Raimy and Bini podcast. Good to have you back. This is episode, I think, 29. Raimy, how are you this morning?
I'm doing excellent, thank you. A little rainy here, but at this very moment, the sun is like peeking out through the clouds. So it's sort of a nice, maybe a nice metaphor for this whole conversation we're about to have today.
Yeah, no, I think winter has come finally here. Although the last few days of like 90-degree weather
I
might
know.
disagree with you, but this morning, overnight was pretty bad, actually. And I got up super early this morning and I was like, okay, I got up, I got out, I started to do work, I was writing something. And the thought of leaving the house and walking to the local synagogue was just not something I was willing to do at that hour in the dark, in the rain. So I stuck it out and wrote for a lot longer, and then I went a little bit later. But yeah, winter has, I think, officially arrived.
You know what? I'll take our winters here in the Middle East over my winters in Pittsburgh that I grew up with any day of the week. So I tried not to complain too much about the weather.
I definitely hear that. Yeah, I want to remind everyone to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. I have been tinkering with the newsletter for the podcast, sending it out just to a very small list of like me and you. I think the last couple of weeks, just to test the waters on what that would look like, how much time that takes. It doesn't take a lot of time in advance of releasing the episodes. Any feedback from our Rabbi Weiss conversation that you got?
I people thought a handful of people I spoke to really enjoyed it. I think they were a little surprised at how political it became, which is just I'd say atypical for you and me in our
Yeah.
podcast. They haven't really gone in that direction, but that's one of the things that I have really enjoyed about our conversations with our guests is that we don't do too much prep work with them. We don't know the direction that the conversations are going, and you sort of take the guest lead. And that's I thought it led into a really interesting neck of the woods that I would not have predicted ahead of time. But I was really happy with how that conversation came out and how much I learned about what Rabbi Weiss does to lead that organization. And I think a lot of people were as well. It just caught them a little bit by surprise.
Yeah, I think for us also, you and I talked a little about this, is that when you bring on a founder, it's a different conversation than when you're bringing on like an expert consultant in the space who has like an area, a real focus of what they're known for. Although those can go different directions too. But when you're talking about a founder, so it's a couple of things. One, they have what they want to talk about. Very often, I feel like there's like not an agenda, but a direction that they want to go in that you're not aware of necessarily. And two, that whole story is just a different piece of the conversation that we typically don't get, which is that founder story in that space. So it's like a unique kind of a thing. There are a lot more people like him. We're going to have one on our next episode, I think. Similar kind of a thing. And you just sort of don't know where that's going to lead. And the politics, I mean, look, there's politics in nonprofits. So it's not shocking. You and I don't talk politics here, except for maybe a couple of comments I made a few weeks ago about the New York City mayor election, um, which actually has impacted some work that I'm doing right now. But otherwise, we stay pretty clear, at least we have for a year plus, of the politics of it. But I got the same thing. I got a lot of feedback saying, like, oh, super interesting, not a subject or a topic I expected you guys to cover. I didn't know anything about that organization or really the industry, even just knowing that that's a vertical within the space of the whole Christian Zionist movement and that whole relationship between Christians and Jews in that way. So yeah, I'm glad we did it. And I think we definitely have to have him back because we didn't get to nearly
Yeah.
half the conversation with.
Yeah, the other interesting thing I was just thinking about as you were talking is, especially with founders, though I'm sure this is true about many people that are just so incredibly deeply passionate about the work that they do, is it's easy for me, for us, I think in a lot of regards to sort of like divorce our politics from our work or certain
Yeah.
aspects. We compartmentalize different parts of our personality. But I think that when to have that conversation with someone who lives and breathes it the way that Rabbi Weiss does, it would have been inauthentic to say, let's not talk about politics. Let's only talk about your organization. Like, this is who he is. That is
Yeah.
his identity. And so I thought all of that came out in a really powerful way. Again, speaking to founders, speaking to that people that are passionate and how it comes out no matter what. It's just how it is with them. And
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
ultimately an awesome thing.
Yeah, they're intertwined. In his case, they're intertwined, and a lot of organizations they are. Um, so especially around if we do these kinds of episodes around election season, you're going to get political figures who are in nonprofit spaces. And Hot Button Topics happens to be, we had booked him earlier, but it happened to be that the whole issue of what he works in the Christian Zionist space sort of exploded a little bit in and around the time that he was coming on. So the politics of it, at least for a short period of time, overwhelmed the work of it, which is, I would say, in many cases, not political, meaning I don't think they're focused on politics per se in terms of the work. A little bit they are, I would say, let me scratch that. They are, but it definitely shaped a really interesting and good conversation. I'm glad we did it. And we'll do more of that because it's part of, I think, what you and I talk about, which is this idea of the wide world of good, what that includes and who that includes. Okay, good of the week. Go for it.
Okay, so this is, I won't get into too much detail, though I'm happy to because this is like my favorite topic. But I run a pretty extensive betting pool for the extended Rubin family for football. There's about
Okay.
35 people in it. Yeah. It's a football betting pool, not fantasy football. This is like NFL betting on games. There's about 35 people in it. It's been going on for, depending on our who the historian of the moment of our family is, it 5 or 6 decades. It goes back to the 50s, 60s or 70s.
Just
Uh,
time out before you continue. I just want to announce that the Raymond Bini podcast does not endorse nor is sponsored by any of the industry companies or businesses that are involved in the games and the areas of betting on sports, nor do we necessarily condone betting on sports. And if you have an issue with respect to gambling, per se, there is gambling, a Gamblers Anonymous, which we don't have linked to here in the show notes. But okay, now you can continue.
well, what makes the betting pool so exciting and interesting is actually to counter people's addictive nature. We sort of merged, my grandfather and his brothers merged the concept of betting with like a kibbutz socialist tendencies, in that whatever the house's take is, if there's like, people bet, let's just use round numbers here, $1,000 into the pot, and at the end of the season there's $500 that the house would have won. That money gets redistributed back to bettors based on how much they put in, so that no one is really losing all that much money. It is sort of like a communist version of betting. There is no house that is making money. It all gets redistributed back to the bettors. And most of the time, you're coming close to what you put in. Not
So there's
everyone
like
gets,
no risk basically to this
there's no
other.
risk. My dad views this, he always calls it a forced savings, which is hilarious for two reasons. One, because he's betting like $100 over the course of the season. And second of all, he is like the most conservative, risk averse person I know, financially and otherwise. So, like, the thought that he even needs a forced savings, like, otherwise he would be so impulsive that he would just go, spend it
That
on
$100.
$100 on candy, like, is hilarious. But yes, it's basically a forced savings where he puts in $100 in September and then at worst gets $90 in January, and sometimes more than that, depending on how much he wins. But that's not my good of the week. That's only the background for the good of the week.
Oh,
The
okay.
the good of the week is that I've been running this pool now for, I think this is my 13th season running the pool for the family, and
Oh, you're the
there
boss.
at the moment, I'm the boss. I've inherited the commissionership. In those 13 years, a lot has happened in the world, technologically speaking. So prior to my being the commissioner, people were still like snail mailing in their picks. We were almost always a week behind because whoever was collecting the picks needed to like physically get them in the mail and tally all of the
Mhm.
results by hand and do a lot of complicated math by hand. So over the last 13 years, I've been able to put it over email. I have an Excel sheet that does all the work for me. I'm not doing any math whatsoever. But my form that I have been using to collect the picks was inadequate, and I didn't know what to do about it. It was causing a lot of problems. I feel like a lot of people are relying on me. It's like, I felt like the heavy burden. Anyway,
Pressure.
due to some encouraging from my nephews, who are like in the teenagers and so much smarter than me, and my wife, who's my age but so much smarter than me. They're like, go to ChatGPT and like ask them how to build a form. Why do you need like, I was comparing Google Form and Typeform and Fill Out and Wufoo and like all these form builders that all have a cost to them and like all have different, pluses and minuses. They're like, just figure out how to build a form. So I did. And it is functional, and my family is using it. I made the switch in the middle of the season, no less, which is like very risky because if something breaks, it's really bad. But I spent a lot of time, like an embarrassingly long amount of time putting this all together, but I built a form from scratch using ChatGPT that works with my Google Sheet, so everything is like tallied for me. It's beautiful. It is a beautiful work of art. What can I say?
I love it. I love that. I was nervous where you were going to like the bottom of this in terms of how, with the loser of your pool, the punishment that they have to endure at the end of the season. And that would be one conversation. Thankfully, you went in a different direction and turned it into a work project. Now you can you can build forms on different systems. I can appreciate that. Okay, my good of the week is a quick one. The Mets, Miami, I'm a New York Mets fan, as you know quite well, and suffered as much, maybe a longer, and not as long as you have suffered as a Pirates fan, but as a Mets fan, many, many, many years. And so the Mets traded their left fielder yesterday, Brandon Nimmo, who's been a Met for life until this point, from the day he was drafted at 18 until his age now at 32, 33. And so he's been along this journey with us for some good moments and so a lot of bad moments. And more than just as a player, he very much represented what's good about the sport as an athlete, as a player. And I wanted to just sort of say goodbye and thanks for all those years of good play and being, let's call it a mensch as a person, and someone who I loved always that he ran on his home runs and he ran to first base when he got walked and he ran out every ball and he's a real hustle player. Just the attitude and the ethos of that kind of style of play, and very much appreciate that. And so um, I hope the guy they're bringing in has some of that to go with him. I have no idea, honestly, but thank him for what he brought, and wish him a lot of luck in Texas. And to his benefit, now there's no state tax, so he'll make a lot more money on that very large contract that he signed a couple of years ago, and maybe he'll give more to charity. I'm sure he's a charitable guy. So
There you go. There you go. All right.
okay, that's good of the week. So anyway, again, reminder to like, subscribe, and share the podcast. And as always, if you have questions, comments, or recommendations for topics, subjects, or guests, by all means to reach out to us. If you'd like to sponsor the podcast, we're open to that as well. Okay, here we go. Our topic of the week is the following thing, which is this. Something that you don't exactly wake up to, Raimy, is that one day there's an article in a local paper that tells you that Mr. Beast and the Rockerfeller Foundation are tag teaming now for philanthropy. And I saw the article yesterday and I thought, we got to talk about this because it hits on an issue that you and I have tinkered around a little bit, but never gone full force in, which is the idea that suddenly you now have a creator with some 250 million followers around the world in multiple languages and in multiple locations, and one of the world's oldest, most respected foundations joining forces to do something in philanthropy. So, just for the record, if you don't know who Mr. Beast is, you are living under a rock, because Mr. Beast is by far the biggest content creator on YouTube, and his following is larger than most countries in the world. And it's all from this guy who just grew up in North Carolina or something like that. And he's entertaining and he's interesting in the whole thing. And we'll talk some about his philanthropy in just a couple of moments. And he's partnering with the Rockefeller Foundation, which I think in all respects is the polar opposite of who Mr. Beast is in terms of just their reputation. Rockefeller Foundation was started by the Rockefeller family, obviously, and over the course of their nearly 100 years, they have contributed somewhere over $500 million to philanthropy to a lot of different kinds of organizations and work. And now they're coming forces, which to me creates the question, which was part of that article, which is philanthropy ripe for disruption? That is my introduction. We can end the conversation right now. You can just say yes or no and then move on. But you tell me, where does this conversation go? What does that storyline, let's start with that, mean to you, say to you, do for you?
So I really like this topic, and as I said a couple minutes ago about our guests, we don't like do so much prep with them and know where the conversation's going to go. Sometimes you and I have clear outlines of where we want conversations to go when it's just
Yeah,
you and me talking. In this case, we don't. We haven't really had the pre-conversation about this. So I'm also really excited about this conversation because I have no idea where you and I are in terms of alignment on this, in terms of our opinions and where this conversation is going to go.
yeah,
So I just wanted to say that I have a lot to say about this. I think ultimately it's awesome to see. It's awesome to see sort of these two giants in their own right coming together and attacking the problem. And they're going to come at it from totally different angles. And I think it has tremendous, tremendous potential. In terms of the question of like, is this why now? And for the disruption, is disruption good? Is it disruption bad? I think disruption is pretty much always good. I was trying to think if there's a case where disruption is bad, like if something is working absolutely perfectly and we're scared to mess with it in some hypothetical situation, then I guess disruption could be bad. But I think the field of philanthropy it's a glass half full, glass half empty conversation. There are ways to look at it right now to say that there is so much money being given out right now. More money, certainly in the US, more money than ever been before. The trend keeps going up, minus a year or two of a global pandemic where the numbers might have been down by a percentage point or two. But by and large, there's so much money being given out right now. The field of philanthropy is doing just fine on the one hand. And on the other hand, the field is full of problems, right? One of them I'm sure we're going to talk about today is young people don't give. We're going to talk about how organizations are way behind the curve when it comes to technology and AI. There's all of these problems in the
Yeah,
field. And so, yeah, disruption is good. See if we can solve those problems. But I don't want to approach it from the sky is falling. And if something like this doesn't happen, then somehow the sector is in total crisis mode. Because I don't believe that to be the case either.
got it. Okay, good. So we're going to get into this a little further. Here's a little bit more background just to understand where Mr. Beast is in terms of philanthropy. Um, so he has a philanthropy channel on his YouTube channels. This is the one channel of his that I actually follow because some of the projects he's been involved with have been super interesting and he's raised a ton of money. And when I started following the philanthropy channel, I'm going to get this is me doing a Donald Trump. I'm going to get back to this the topic in just a second here. Um, so, um, so it was because my kids were watching Mr. Beast. I wasn't per se watching Mr. Beast. I wasn't interested in his like giving away money if you can keep your hand on a circle for 3 days kind of thing. But once he started doing philanthropy, I was curious. And so over the course of time, he's done a couple of really interesting ones. He partnered with Mark Rober, who is another large YouTube content creator who was a NASA scientist for many years, who then left that to go into YouTube content creation, which sounds crazy, but got famous because of his squirrel challenges. But his other incredible videos and the glitter, right?
The
The
glitter
glitter
bomb,
ball,
yeah.
bomb. So anyway, so they partnered up for Team Trees, which was basically the idea of saving and planting trees around the world. And they raised $20 million in less than 2 months, had 800,000 donors. They did Team Seas, which is basically to clean up the oceans. They raised $30 million. Um, and the $1 does 1 unit of impact in whatever that is. So it's, $1 is a tree, $1 is a certain square footage of garbage or whatever it was, or tonnage of garbage that was to be cleaned up. And it's simplified. And because of the size and scope of their reach, they were able to raise a lot of money. And then beyond that, the trust layer that comes with them being liked and followed creators who, for the most part, till that point, weren't really taking money for anything other than from maybe YouTube because they were large content creators. So they had this built in capital relationship that was there. And so they expended it to some degree on asking people to donate $1, $5, $10, whatever the case may be. That is just one, that is the case of Mr. Beast as an example. There are other content creators and other influencers who have used other platforms like Tiltify, which I'll link to in the show notes as a platform where people do this kind of thing. And so it's definitely become a bigger thing. As to the like now back to the point, so to me, it's already been disrupted. Just I think that most of the people in the industry haven't realized that it's actually happened, and it's happening around them, beneath them, and through them, even while just in many cases they're ignoring a lot of what it is. I think your point about is disruption ever bad? I think it's we always only hear about it when it's good, and that there are probably situations that something just went south, and we didn't call it disruption in that
Mhm.
space. We called it corruption. We called it revolution. We called it something else and it fell apart. So you could say like any revolution that's taken place is a disruption in the system. Right. And so if the revolution doesn't last, then it wasn't a successful disruption. It was a blip on the screen. And the victors of that historical moment will write the story that it was just a blip, and it was just, whatever it was. So I definitely hear that. In terms of the specifics here, like, I'm curious about how you think about what that would be, why that might be necessary, how that would actually go about taking place, all those different things to make it either disruptable or what disruption might actually look like here.
Well, it's interesting because one of the things that I think about it from the in the philanthropic sector is what is an applicable lesson that can be learned for the average nonprofit, whatever that means. And so a lot of times I roll my eyes and sort of dismiss these big examples that you're throwing out because on the surface, I don't know how much there is to learn for an organization that has, a $5 million budget, a $10 million budget, and doesn't have, Mr. Beast's phone number on speed dial. Like, I think that there's a sort of limited application of what we can learn from these types of examples. But I do think that if we spend more than a second thinking about it, there probably are lessons that we can learn. And while these organizations don't have these mega content creators available, they for sure have micro content creators, and every little community has their own Mr. Beast, has their own person who's really loud on social media and
Yeah.
has the attention of a demographic that you're trying to reach. So I think there are probably ways that organizations can learn from this big effect, but ultimately, I don't know that I see these sorts of collaborations, whether it's Mr. Beast or Mark Rober or whomever, as disruption in the sense that I don't know how much it changes the field as a whole right now.
Okay, but so step away then from that as a version of disruption. And how you brought that down to the smaller nonprofit, I think is really good as a practical takeaway here. You and I have talked about this before, and I made it a piece of the curriculum when I was doing coaching on campaigns for peer to peer. We didn't need major influencers, we needed micro influencers. And it was a sort of the local person who could move a few people here and there to do what you needed for your organization to raise more money, to leverage the influence that some people have to raise more money or to raise more awareness about your organization. In fact, I was much like I doubled down on that more than I did on actual content creator influencers. So I didn't feel like I actually had any capital or skin in the game that would actually move any numbers or dollars, and rather focus on the micro in that piece of the curriculum. Made it a role of people who played of individuals who played a role in a peer to peer time constrained campaign. Influencer was a role. So the same way that donor was a role or match donor was a role, influencer was a role because that person did something unique and special that amplified or multiplied impact in that space. The truth is, the role of influencer is by and of itself a disruption in the system because you gave somebody capital and space and value who doesn't necessarily have any money, because of the impact that they have and the import that you might give them as a role or as a voice for your organization, whereas in the past you might have ignored them and sort of shifted them out to the side. And so, um, like, I think one of the things that this leads to the next part of the conversation, which I think is, okay, it may not be Mark Rober or Mr. Beast type influencers or a Tiltify kind of a platform, let's say, but the platform thing is actually a disruption. Take me inside then, like, how do we think about, disruption as I think as a path forward to some degree in philanthropy, or why deeper as to why it's necessary for the space? Because I think it's necessary, but
So let me throw it back to you then. Why do you think it's necessary? What are there specific problems that you think we need to fix, or else something bad is going to happen?
yeah, I think that I wrote about this. I never published this article. I wrote a piece about the idea of going back to sort of first principles about philanthropy and giving. Leave aside for a moment, and it was hard to do this, the idea that in the Judaic community, the Judeo-Christian community, even in Islamic communities and other communities as well, there's sort of like a commandment around being charitable. And I think that's always going to be true. But the institutional version of it, the organizational version of it, let's say, there is a clearly, I think there are better ways to fund these kinds of initiatives 100% of the time for great success that don't require the industry around it, that I think often is just there to support or to protect better the people who work in it. And so if it is the case that charitable organizations exist to solve a problem, which is, I think, in many cases it is, other than the, again, the tax benefit nature of a nonprofit status, right? If you're there to, there's a problem to solve and I want to solve, and this, I want to solve it. So then your goal in your business should be to go out of business, not to stay in business in perpetuity and have jobs for people just because you want to be charitable to those people. And so I think that fundamentally, the system is set up in the way that it is, and it's the same system that it's been for hundreds of years, except that we have more tools at our disposal to raise money in slightly different ways. And so I think fundamentally, if I'm not being clear, you can tell me. Fundamentally, I think there is probably a different way to do all of this that would actually benefit everybody, and it's not socialism or communism.
So can you get a little bit more specific about what you have in mind when you're seeing that in the
Yeah.
future?
So you always have, in every society, again, assuming that not everybody is going to be wealthy in a society, there are always going to be people who are struggling, right? So if you know that there's a food need, right? It doesn't need 50 food banks in a community. Maybe you need one, right? And that one can be funded by the community. It doesn't require asking people on a yearly basis to donate to that organization. You can just simply make it set up that from their paycheck, 1% of their paycheck goes to the local food bank every year, and it's funded. And it doesn't require a fundraiser going and feeling beat down because everybody says no to them all the time, or it doesn't require an executive director who has to set up a campaign. It's funded. That's just what we do. We fund these projects. We take care of the people who need to be taken care of, and it's funded. And so, on some level, that's better. Wholly better across the board? No. Are there going to be emergencies that are going to come up? Yes. But I think there are fundamental ways to do this in a manner different. And that most of the time, what we're trying to do is to come up with a way to get more people to donate more often, right? Instead of looking at it from the beginning, way back here, and saying, how do we fix that? And then, yes, will that cause other people to then have to find new jobs? Potentially. That's not a bad thing.
So I want to get into the weeds on this a little bit. Can I give you a real example?
Go for it.
Specifically, it happens to be that this is examples. It is in the food pantry sector, which is just interesting because you picked that example. But but I've lived through this. I was working with an organization a bunch of years ago. They were a food pantry. They were the main food pantry in the community, and they were very organized and played by the rules and were connected with other institutions and government funding so that what they did is they tried to capture as much information from the people that were using their food pantry as possible. And then they could plug them into job training if it was necessary, or they could plug them in to housing facilities if that's what was necessary, or if they had kids, they would capture that to make sure that there's everything is being taken care of in terms of
Yeah.
education and resources. They tried to approach this as a holistic from a holistic perspective so that we were capturing the whole of the situation. And in that same community, there was sort of a renegade food pantry that popped up. And the second food pantry had no bar to cross to walk in. I believe it was one of those food pantries. I think it was in, I forget where it was, but it was in somewhere that was publicly accessible. And often it was not staffed. There was no person there. And they basically said, the food pantry is here. You can walk in. I'm sure it closed at night, but like, here are the hours. You can literally walk in, take what you need, and leave, whether or not there is a staff member there.
Yeah.
And the first food pantry was sort of up in arms, saying like, how can the community allow funding for this second food pantry? They're not playing by the rules. They're not doing anything that we're supposed to be doing. They're not looking at the whole. They are. And the second food pantry was like, correct. We are just solving this one problem where someone needs dinner tonight and doesn't want to fill out 17 forms to get dinner by going to your food pantry, and doesn't want anyone else knowing, and doesn't want someone calling them and saying, does your kid have a backpack to bring to school tomorrow? They just want to be able to walk in the door, get a couple of canned goods, and walk out the
Yeah.
door with no strings attached. And it sort of, within this community that we were operating within, I was working with the main food pantry, and I sort of heard their side of the story first before I got the second side of the story, um, it really caused like this big philosophical debate. There was like a lot of I mean, it was rich conversation. It was heated because tension was high and people felt very
Sure.
strongly one way or another
Money is
about this.
involved.
But like, money is involved, and but it opened up a lot of questions about what is the point, and is competition good, like within the nonprofit sphere? So I don't know. I question a little bit the way that you're talking about the field right now.
Right. But in that case, it probably didn't require a second food pantry. It just probably required slightly widening the tent in the first food pantry to include an option that provided for that second need. And maybe the conversation was the wrong conversation. I mean, I've had this conversation. It's in a slightly different realm. When I used to work in helping synagogues, yes, that's an actual role. Synagogue consulting was one of the things that I've done over the course of many years. And then these like little pop-up synagogues would come up in these communities and would cause like this massive ruckus and problem. And those of you who are not in the Jewish community who are listening to this and watching this, I apologize for this sort of inside baseball moment. But and they would call me and say, "Can you help us?" In some cases, I remember one distinctly with a friend of mine who was the startup on the new place. I like literally laughed at him on the phone. Like, and then I a little bit yelled at him because I was like, you're a smart guy. This is the solution. But you had to start another one. There's like 12 of you, and now you have two. Like, it didn't make any sense. And just thought like, okay, you want to disrupt, you have a problem, there's an issue. There's a smart way to do that. You know, but it's another way to go about these kinds of things. So I use the food bank one as an example because I think it's sort of understandable that you want to take care of your own, and there's a way to fund that. And it should be obvious that that's true, and that everyone should, in theory, participate in that in a local community in a given situation, right? The facts on the ground is that it's not true and it doesn't happen, and we have all these other things. But fine, I'm operating in the theoretics because it doesn't exist. But to me, the disruption is like that's how I think about it is fundamental and core. And a lot of what we're doing is simply just putting band-aids on things and coming up with new kunzes and tools to get to the same thing that we were doing before instead of fundamentally shifting how we think about all of it from the beginning. That's my whole point here.
So then, how do you go about disrupting the sector?
So I don't think it's going to be that way, but I do think it's going to happen in a variety of different ways. I do think that a lot of things are happening already that are disrupting the sector that I think affect a lot of the people who we know who work in it. And in many cases, they're not equipped to actually deal with it. I think you and I were and still are attached to some degree to a company called CauseMatch. It is a crowdfunding peer-to-peer platform. You could give it the pitch line if you want, but the that whole industry, online donating, right? Online fundraising donations, that whole thing is a disruption to the system, right? It
Yes.
starts with the donation page, just an online presence where you can give, the ability to just put your credit card information in, boom, great. The whole campaign thing disrupted, you and I remember, disrupted how people thought about their entire fundraising calendar and where and how they would then fundraise during the course of the year, right? And it became a core component in many cases for a lot of organizations of how they would fundraise going forward. When that started, everyone thought it was crazy, right? Even when we had Rabbi Weiss on last week, he talked about the idea that he remembers when the company launched and he thought it was crazy,
Hmm.
right? But the truth is, it wasn't crazy. It just was the tool was different because it was an online space as opposed to an in-person space, or as opposed to, you know, the March of Dimes doing a call-a-thon back in the old days, the Jerry Lewis telethon thing. And so it's simply just a different version of it. But there are incremental disruptions happening in the industry all the time that in many cases people are not paying attention to or thinking of them in that way. And more often than not, they're dismissing them and relying on what they do and what they've done until they can no longer do what it is that they've done. So to put that into real terms, okay, as an example, let's say you're an organization, you rely on a small handful of people to support everything you do. It's like 5 people, let's say, right? They're your funders. Okay. And then one of them, has reached the ripe old age of 120, has passed away, and now it's in their will. It's a second generation. You didn't do any work with the second generation. You now have lost 20% of your funding because for 100 years, whatever the number of years is, you did nothing else to shore up the situation because this is what we do, tunnel vision, this is how we do it. And so when, it hits the fan, you're not prepared because you dismissed the Netflix because you were a Blockbuster, right? And you didn't, take into account how can I do this in a way that keeps core to what I'm doing and how I am as a human being, as an organization, and my fundamental principles, but allows me to open up the conversation and the door to other people in a way that makes sense for what it is that we're doing, right? So those disruptions are happening, whether it's the online campaign, whether it's building, workflows and automations into the systems, they're already happening. It's just a question of whether or not people are paying attention to it or calling it disruption in the way that I'm calling it disruption. And that's going to
So
play itself forward because, sorry to cut you off, because younger people are operating in a certain way. The next generation of donor, the psychology of the donor who's Gen Z and what's after them, Gen Alpha. I think that's the term, right?
I don't know.
Think about how they're going to think about giving, where it is that they're going to give, what they need when they give, and what they won't do,
Hmm.
right? And so to me, that's like me thinking through the system is like, if my organization needs to exist for another generation, I have to be prepared for that generation as it's coming. And that's going to be
Yes.
disruptive.
So I like that. I'm starting to wrap my head around what you're saying now because I I feel like when we were in the theoretical, I was getting lost a little bit. But
Sorry.
now when you're breaking it down, I think it's a me problem, not a you problem.
It
When
is.
we're
It is.
breaking it down and you start to name what the problem is, right? We're saying we are having trouble, the field is having trouble with this wealth transfer and attracting younger donors. Like, great. I can wrap my arms around that and say, okay, let's put the smartest minds in the room. Let's put Mr. Beast in a room with Mr. Rockefeller and, you know, lock them in the room for 6 hours and say, don't come out until you have a solution to how we can solve for the fact that you have these older donors transferring their wealth and younger donors don't understand the culture of philanthropy or why the specific cause is important to them. That to me sounds like a really awesome formula for positive disruption.
Yeah. And then it goes from there because as the tech pieces come up and as the new generation of people come up, those two things are happening at the same time. Someone has to be thinking about what does this mean for me? How what's coming? What do I have to be prepared for? Second and third and fourth level, you know, strategic thinking, right? Thinking through all the domino effects and Lego effects and building whatever, however you want to describe those things. And I see it and maybe you do too. We talk about some of these pieces of technology with leaders, and they look at you like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, this isn't important to me. Doesn't matter to me. I'm not going to use this anyway. You're going to be obsolete in 10 minutes because like this is going to just blow the doors off. Right. And so, or again, and that's not just tech in the way that we think about the technology around, again, online platforms or even like ChatGPT and AI. When you get to like spaces like crypto and all that other stuff, which I think most people do not understand fundamentally or how that can play a role in this, these are game changing technologies that fundamentally uproot core principles of the industry that will leave organizations behind.
Hmm.
And so that's how I think about it. Like, again, last year, give you another example. We hosted here a Mitch Stein, right? Mitch Stein from Chariot, right? We'll link to them again in the show notes. They're the daft people, right? For lack of a better term, donor advised fund people. They made it easy to use a donor advised fund on your donate page. I think very much they're disrupting how a certain percentage of people give and think about giving. And more so as it continues forward, because they did something really simple, is they figured out how to draw the line between a lot of money and the way in which that's being given or not given during the course of the year. And to me, that's an example, a very specific example of a disruption in the industry that a lot of people just aren't taking advantage of.
Yeah. So can I there are a couple other problems in the field that I want to throw out because I think there are some of these problems are being addressed, right? We're seeing the technological piece being addressed, maybe not to the extent that we want it to be addressed, but we're seeing it being addressed. I don't know that we're seeing the younger donors problem being addressed so much, although maybe this new collaboration will
Who do you
spur
think
some
who
results.
do you think gives to a Mr. Beast campaign on YouTube or
Kids.
Tiltify, right? They're going to be, if you do the math on 800,000 donors that raised whatever the number is, they're very small donations, right?
Yeah, yeah, of course. They're kids.
So
They're
they're kids.
kids. They're kids. And just to stay on that for 1 second, like, I'm not, at the risk of disagreeing with brilliant people like Mr. Beast and Mark Rober, I sometimes question whether or not it's worth our how much resources going into solving the problem of younger donors, because younger donors don't ever give. That's not a this generation thing. That is an age thing. Just like they're not thinking about retirement yet, they're not thinking about charitable giving. That tends to be something that happens later on in life. I think organizations tend to get scared, and they absolutely should be cognizant of the wealth transfer that's happening. But I don't know in terms of a sustainability model what that looks like for Mr. Beast to get a bunch of 15-year-old kids to give to his campaign. I don't know what that looks like from a ongoing perspective. I'm not saying that it's that there's the amount of money that he's raising, even if it's a one-time thing and they never raise another dime after that, it's still a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
There's a tremendous amount of value in it. I just often question when people freak out about how younger donors don't give. I just like to point out that younger donors never give. It's not
It's not
it's
new.
not it's not so surprising. But there are other pieces of the sector where I feel like, if anything, the problem is being reinforced over time without any sense of disruption, at least not from my knowledge. And I can give you the biggest example that jumps to my mind right now is I've spoken to several nonprofit leaders recently that are growing increasingly frustrated. And that might be too uh, not a severe term enough, because they were more than frustrated. They were pulling their hair out with foundation funding. And it's
Yeah.
something that I've been paying more attention to, because I think foundations are really trying to be super smart and strategic about the way that they give out money. I think they want to do this the right way.
Yeah.
So they are trying to collect as much data as possible, and they're trying to understand what the outcomes are going to be, and they want the logic models of all of these programs, and they want to know exactly what they're funding so that they can say, this is what our money did. And at the end of this process, our money did X, Y, or Z. And fundraisers, nonprofit leaders don't understand it and are ill-equipped to provide them with the information that they need. They just want to go and do the programs that they know to work. And as one leader that I spoke to recently said, he was older, he's in his 70s, and he said when he got started in the field, he said all that mattered, see if I can get this right, were four things: what was in your heart, what was in your head, what you could do with your hands, and a fourth part of your body that shall go unnamed in this podcast. He said that you needed gumption. We'll say it like that. You
Okay.
needed those four things. You needed to be able to think, you needed to be able to feel, you needed to be able to do, and you needed to take some risks. And if you
Yeah.
were able to demonstrate that, foundations loved it and ate it up and pushed it through. And now he said the amount of data collection that he needs to do and the amount of work that goes into these proposals, and not just the proposals, but the reporting afterwards.
Yeah.
He said it's eating up their time, is a waste of time. It does nobody any benefit. It's a dog and pony show. And it's millions of dollars we're talking about here. In
Yeah.
this one example, we're talking millions of dollars. And preparing for this podcast and having that conversation on the heels of it, I'm thinking, like, how do we disrupt something like that? That is a problem that I say, like, what can we do about it? Foundations want to make the smartest investment possible, and nonprofit professionals just want to go out and do good work. And it sort of seems like those two things are at odds. We can't do both of those things. We can't have the best information and be able to go out and do the best work, because the organizations are too under-resourced and understaffed to be able to do both things excellently. So I was just thinking about that. Like, where's the disruption on that? How can we fix that problem? And I don't know the answer to it.
I have a couple of ideas that are sort of just bubbling to the surface in my head about it, but I'm not comfortable sharing those here freely,
But
just because I don't think they're not fully formed in any way at all to be able to share them like intelligently here in the space of, truth be told, and I've said this here in other cases, the grant space and foundation space was not an area of strength for me in terms of my fundraising work. So I don't necessarily appreciate all the nuance that's there or where the foundation itself is coming from, whereas the organization is coming from. And so I don't have a good grasp of all those things. The first thing that jumps up is a lot of that reporting stuff can be taken care of in some cases, I think, if fundamentally you're doing good reporting to begin with. And so a lot of the anxiety that leaders have, it's not like you're talking to people who are the most organized data people around in terms of the work that they're doing on an annual basis. It's just that someone's holding their feet to the fire because you want $1 million from them and they want information from you, which is probably information you should have to begin with. You don't. And so you're not organized that way. But I think a lot of it in that sense is yes, you then have to, then you're manipulating or you're aligning yourself based on what you're looking at the foundations that are out there and how their reporting is set up. That's why, as I said, I saw your reaction and it's not fully formed, but I definitely hear you. I think that is a key component of the industry that is not yet disrupted in the same way, but probably bigger than the way the DAF thing, I think, was a problem for the industry that is becoming solved in a variety of ways once that door was open, or the way that crowdfunding and peer-to-peer platforms opened up the door to a lot of new donors who were not available to you before for a whole host of reasons, and the way that social media platforms have given you the space to amplify your message and your word to reach people who are on the other side of the planet who you would never hear from and wouldn't know about you. I think there are components to this that are not yet touched. In some cases, I think with respect to grants and foundations, I think there's a reason for that. I think they don't want that. But
You think who doesn't want that?
I think the foundation side of this, which controls a lot of the money, this is me being conspiratorial for just a second, isn't interested because it's their money. So it's our money. We, will decide how we want to spend it. And if that means we're going to be, difficult in the lead up to spending it, go somewhere else.
Yeah. Yeah. I can think of one example of how that specific issue is being disrupted now, although I haven't heard about it in a while. But you did have foundations for a long time. I think the first one to make it popular anyway. I don't know if it was the Gates Foundation or not. Might have been a different foundation, but they decided to sunset and just give away all their money. So they will make you jump through hoops to be awarded that money, because they weren't
Yeah.
just going to give you, the 5% of whatever the interest they were
Yeah.
getting on all their investments were. They were going to give away their whole kitty
Yeah.
and
There's
say,
an
we're
organization
not.
here that's doing the same thing.
Yeah, yeah. This has happened. It became somewhat popular where or foundations, I think, were getting tired of incremental change and said, okay, if you can do so much with $1 million,
Yeah.
what can you do with $10 million or more? And
Yeah.
so I don't know. Ultimately, I don't know enough to be able to say whether that has proved successful or not or
Right.
whatever. But in terms of it being a disruptive idea, I think there are ideas out there that could address it. And I certainly wasn't putting the burden on you with no advance notice to solve the problem right here and now while we're on air.
Yeah, I hear that. So I don't want it to go too long here, but um, I don't know if we're making the case for, making the case against disruption. I mean, I think it's pretty clear where I am on this subject. I'm not sure where you are on this subject exactly, but I think on some level you are living it as in terms of the work that you're doing is disruptive in some way to legacy giving because you're writing for tons of organizations and you're putting, you're telling their stories for them so they can use all these different platforms. And so you, my friend, are at the core of the problem of disruption, whether you want to admit it or not. But the creative space is a core piece of the puzzle for it, which was, again, is another example of where like some of the anxiety and the stress and the tension is I want to do great things. I just don't know how to tell a good story. And so I'm not good at the fundraising, or like me coaching fundraisers and helping them understand how it works and what to think and how to approach and how to all that other stuff to get them to be successful. Whereas before they're thinking like, I'm just not good at this, right? Is disruptive for their organizations in a certain way. So like I'm all for it because I think in the ultimate end of it, collectively, it'll be good for the industry. I think Mr. Beast in this space is good for the industry. Although I don't think you're right. It's not going to be everybody. I do think he draws in younger donors, which I think is good for the industry. I do think he forces organizations to think about things in a way that they haven't in the same way that same Mackenzie Scott on the other side of that made foundations think about how they were dealing with their money and how they were, being difficult about it. And I think people like that are really good for the industry. At the same time, you don't want to blow it up and make a mistake and have a disaster on your hands, because that's possible, right? The disruption, the flip side of the disruption that's good in that is that, of course, there's the equal and opposite end of that puzzle of disruption, which is if you go all in on content creators and you don't have systems in place, you what did you do? Like, you had a 1-day event that cost everybody money and you didn't actually do anything. You ended up with like an ice bucket challenge kind of a thing where it was good for one season and then it didn't hold. So, like,
Yeah.
I'm all in on the disruption piece. I think there's a more coming. I'm hoping to ride some of the wave of it. But yeah, you tell me. I'll give you the last word on this conversation.
I ultimately, I think disruption is good. I just want to be thoughtful about it. And I don't know that we can always, I think in this sense, we're not going to always see it coming. It might be easier to understand what has been disruptive in retrospect rather than thinking about it future focused. I think in this case we're going to see things that it's like crowdfunding that we might have predicted didn't stick around but do stick around. We might not have understood how big of a difference a DAF integration could make. Like there are things that I think we don't sometimes. The iPad comes out and you're like, okay, this changes everything. There's a new thing. ChatGPT comes out and we're like, okay, everything has changed overnight. And sometimes you realize the disruption over time. And I have a feeling that that's going to be the case more with philanthropy, but maybe I'm wrong.
That was such a good hedge to end it off on. Maybe I'm wrong. Prove me wrong. Tell me where I'm wrong. Um, okay, so then I would say this. I definitely hear that. Do the following. Play the role here then of consultant for an organization that's worried about disruption, and you know tell them where they should look at it and lean into it, and but what they have to protect, let's say, to make sure that they're still on solid ground in the event that, I don't know, it doesn't work. Like, there are things that are fundamental, let's say, that they need to keep always, and there are things that they can tinker with around the edges, let's say, that could work for the disruptive piece of the industry.
It's a really good question. I think there's one, it helps for me, this is totally projecting, but it helps for me to name what the problems are. Because I think if that way we're going to be able to say, okay, these solutions that are out there are applicable to us or they're not. So I think that's number one. If you don't feel like your organization, if you feel like there's a tool out there and you're not really sure what it's coming to solve for, I think that's where you can get distracted by a shiny new object, which I think is a serious, serious concern.
Yeah.
But I think if you are able to point at a problem and say, okay, we have a younger donor problem, or we have a foundation problem, or we have a technological problem, then you can start to see what's out there and understand how those solutions might be able to alleviate your organization's pain points. And just to be well read, to know what's happening in the field, in the sector, and places that are adjacent to it. I think that there are going to be ideas that come out of places you wouldn't imagine. When my kids first started watching Mr. Beast, just to bring it full circle, like I really thought that he was the dumbest person in the world. I like did not understand how he could become so famous. And then I actually read an article in, I think it was Bloomberg at the time. This is years ago, and that sort of dissected the genius that was Mr. Beast. And he originally got started because he was sitting around with his friends in the earlier days of YouTube and was trying to reverse engineer the algorithm for what YouTube pushes. What should your next video be?
Right.
And he and his friends cracked it. They spent hours cracking it. They literally dropped out of college and say, okay, if we can solve this, then we're going to make more money than we ever could doing any other job that you would get with a college degree.
Yeah.
His first video was him counting to like 1 million or 10 million. It's him sitting in a chair counting, but he knew the exact formula that YouTube needed to push his video up, and it went viral. It is the most boring video of all time. It is meant to be it, but he knew it had a number in there, the way that it was worded, like everything was crafted. How did I get on this? Because good ideas come from the craziest places. So I don't know what the practical advice is, but just don't put your head in the sands. Know what's out there. Know what the trends are. speak to colleagues where they're getting ideas from, because you're going to be surprised about where the disruption comes from.
Uh, That was a much better way to end it. Thank you.
But maybe I'm wrong.
Okay, that is our conversation. This conversation is going to continue on because we're going to come back to it as new technologies come up, as things continue to happen, as we start to learn more, we see data that tells us and educates us about what's happening, what's not happening around us. And if you have any, again, thoughts, ideas, questions, comments, by all means, share them with us. We'll see you next time.